someone's looking, because you have all different kinds of investors. You have, guys that want your firstborn, and, if you're not paying them 20%, they don't want to talk to you. You have your hard money lenders that, that go right up to the usury law. You have, and then you have the other side of the spectrum that you give someone 6, and if they get 10, they're delighted and they're with you forever.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Darrin Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is Ken Van Loo. He's a real estate investor, and his career has taken him through flipping houses, new construction and development, and assisted living. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Ken about real estate development and investing. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Ken. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Thank you very much, Darrin. It's my pleasure to be here today. Really looking forward to adding some value and talking commercial real estate, risk management, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. And before we get going, though, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure. I started out and was told, go off to college, get a few degrees, and you'll be very, very successful. So, I followed that direction from my dad, and I went off to study civil engineering, but I really wanted to play sports in high school. So I was a sport jock advocate. Currently I'm with the same woman after 38 years, had 3 wonderful children, twins. My son's a U.S. intelligence Marine officer. My daughter married a doctor, nutritionist, dietitian, youngest, very, very successful. So first and foremost, father, successful businessman, developer, call myself, king of skyscrapers, was fortunate to build a bunch of skyscrapers in New York City. But by profession, as I said, started off, created the 6-year plan in college, became a professional civil engineer, went ahead wanting to be a civil engineer, but, did a master's in civil engineering, and then really figured that, I wanted to develop. So I had acquired a master's in real estate development from NYU and had this illustrious career in New York City building skyscrapers. And then my claim to fame was developing a $17 million assisted living with really no real estate experience and none of my own money. And that's what led to, the writing of the Modern Wealth Building Formula and Financial Freedom Protocol and the good things we're doing today.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you've had quite a bunch, quite a bit of experience. Tell me a little bit about, building skyscrapers. What was your role in that? Was that as an engineer, or how were you?
Yeah, no, I played many roles in building skyscrapers over the years. When I was 26 years old, after building as a superintendent on a 32-unit building in Poughkeepsie, I was offered a position to build 2 33-story buildings as a project superintendent for the LEFRAC organization. And that led me to ultimately build a $1 billion project in Brooklyn for, you may have heard of him, Bruce Ratner. He owned the New Jersey Nets. And, that's where I kind of earned my stripes. I worked myself up from project super to senior PM, ultimately project executive, went on to work for a couple big developers, and then developed, along with another co-developer, a project on 240 Park Avenue. It was a 30-story building, which, I had the pleasure of meeting Tom Brady, who came to look at the penthouse. But, I was basically trained by the #1 CM company in the world, Lear McGovern Bovis. They restored the Statue of Liberty. I went to work for them. It was just Lear McGovern. They were eventually bought by Bovis. I was trained through that organization. And, at one point I was standing on top of a skyscraper I built, and I had twins, and I was 6 figures in debt, going like, I have to do something, because this job thing as a super building skyscrapers is paying me 6 figures, but, I was spending more than I was making, and that's when I really figured, if I can build a $10 million project, I could pay myself close to 15% fees, between a 5% development fee, 8% general conditions, and the 3% construction management fee. I'd be into business and would never have to look back. So that's what I did. I plugged in a 113 bed assisted living. That was my first deal out of the pipeline. And then I learned in reverse. I call it top down thinking. Fast forward, 2000, that happened in 2000, essentially. By 2015, I had a company called Flipping New Jersey, Flipping USA, where we did 137 residential deals in 1 year. And then shortly thereafter that is when I wrote the Modern Wealth Building Formula, articulating what I had done over the last 20 years, building skyscrapers, commercial buildings, big site developments, all kinds of great things. And it was all due to this formula that I put in writing, and the system of how to find, fund, and facilitate real estate.
Oh, that's awesome. I love the realization there as you're building these skyscrapers, recognizing, that you're not getting the full value of just being a participant, but to actually, participate on the equity side, or, have to be an investor in the project. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't, I thought I didn't ask your question. So I started off, building these projects at every single level in the construction management field. And then I was fortunate in 96, before I went out on my own in 99, to go work for, Bruce Eichner and a couple other major developers in New York City. And then, did my own down the road in 2008. But, it was great. Because I was able to, graduate in engineering. I won the Senior Design Award, which is a site development. It was a 13-acre site where they said, okay, it's a 1 acre zoning, design it. So I designed a cul-de-sac with 12 lots and drainage. And in 1985, I did this in CAD and literally blew my professors out of the water. They're like, who is this guy? And that's when it planted the seed that I'm going to develop one day. But I didn't know any better. And here I'm like cracking my teeth, playing football, drinking too much beer, trying to become an engineer. And, 6 years later, I became one, fortunately, because I met the woman I'm with today, who, taught me how to study calculus and all that good stuff. But, it was just fortunate, because that planted the seed, like, wow, if I can design them, fast forward, I started building them. I could build them, go back and get a second master's degree with NYU, learn how to finance them. I could maybe do this myself. Because coming from a family, with full love and to give you the motivation. But, my dad worked for PSE&G, electrical company, climbing telephone poles, running a crew. And my mom was a bank teller, and all they knew was, hey, we didn't go to college, go to school, get a degree, get a great job, and you'll do phenomenal. Little did they know, 18% interest when I got married, and, you needed 30, 40 grand for a deposit for a house. It wasn't easy, and it's even tougher today with kids, so, I share that with you to see what opens up and how we can give the listeners some value. So it reduces friction for them to get to where they want to go,
Yeah, no, I love the, I think so often, I guess one of the things that's kind of a reality check is just how many people are involved in a real estate transaction and how few of them are actually involved as investors. Even if it's their career, whether it be a real estate broker or lender, or anybody on the construction side of things, they're not always invested in it, even though they understand how to make the project. And it always, I don't know, always, I ever since I've understood the value of being an investor, I'm going like, that's what I want. I want somebody else to pay me, kind of thing. And it's always been kind of a goal of mine, is to have more of that. Not even understanding what it was when I first did it, but just knowing that I wanted that.
Yeah.
So
You
I'm
could
glad to
say
hear.
that again. Yeah, there
Yeah.
are a lot of players involved. You wouldn't imagine all the moving parts in a development, and it's nice to be the investor, um, fortunately I don't have to get as deep into the weeds, but, I find myself on, we have a 45-acre piece in North Carolina, and I'm, have my hands in the mix of the engineering and the design standards and, things that I could help accelerate the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the other things that's always been kind of a mystery to me of sorts, and that I the timeline it takes to develop a project. I can only imagine how long did it take you when you were building these 30-story buildings from breaking ground to final occupancy uh, permits?
Yeah, great question. I would usually take about 19 months, and we would move in, our first, say, 7 floors. So, you'd have to have the building complete, elevators running. And normally the first, if it was a 30-story building, you would deliver the building and what we would call 4 different temporary certificate of occupancies, and it would go from, 19 months to probably like 26 months before you'd have it fully occupied.
Yeah. No, when you're in the market for something and you're looking for a finished product, there's just the make the offer, due diligence, financing, close. You can usually handle that in like 90 to 120 days on a smaller project. But when you start thinking about 24 months to build it, not even talking about the design and, the zoning and whatever else may have taken place prior to that, it's always a little bit of
Yeah.
a reality check there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, most projects you're underwriting for 3-4 years down the road, from the time you're, you know, spending your first soft cost.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Um, so you were working for others building in New York City. Did you invest yourself directly in New York City, or whereabouts were you when you
Yeah,
started
yeah.
building and
My
investing?
first investments were in New York City, New Jersey, primarily in this metropolitan area, and I really, followed, what my mentor said, you should try to be within an hour, of what you're trying to accomplish. And, it took many years before we started branching out, into North Carolina, Texas, Florida, and made some acquisitions. And now I'm doing some developments in other states. So we have stuff in Jersey, New York, North Carolina on the development side. And it's really just about being confident that you can have the control systems in, right? Because you don't want to let those big animals get out of control. Some of these bigger projects, like we were, briefly touching upon, it's risk versus reward. What's the risk, as far as, being able to deliver it. That's what it's all about.
No. So I'm guessing, just talking risk and reward there, with as long as you've been doing this, I'm assuming there may have been a project or maybe two that didn't go as planned. Um, can you share a story of how things might have gotten out of control, or lessons you might have learned from a project?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been pretty fortunate, but, it's funny because I'm glad, because on the projects that I guess you can say I blew the budget and the time, it was on, when I got into some of the residential stuff where I was getting into the fixing and flipping, and my systems, wasn't something I guess I did initially. And, there was, ones that I bought, and, I figured, I was going to make 100 grand, and, I'd lucky if I made 20. There was others where I would, I'd miss that there was a lien. And I remember I'm getting ready to go to a closing, supposed to make like 27 grand, and, a $20,000 lien popped up, on a lot of the bigger projects that I was involved in. I guess my troubles came where, I had a property in Jersey City on the water that I was supposed to close, and, I was working with some investors that I didn't really know well, and they didn't show up at the closing with the money, and I couldn't close on the property. And, I learned my lesson about, you have to have the money in escrow. You have to write the check, and I learned, so, it was all about structure, more control in place. Don't think that the little ones can't get away from you. You got to follow, like the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So, if you're building a skyscraper and you got to build the thing on paper right down, to the last screw, because with skyscrapers, we literally build them on paper. When you're breaking ground on a skyscraper, the thing is essentially, 80% bought out, because you have to have a guaranteed maximum price, because the bank won't fund you unless they know it's under control, and that's the key, so you have to buy precisely within budget. And then once you get to like 70% of the buy, you have to guarantee the maximum price, and then the funds flow as needed to accelerate.
Yeah. No, that's a good reminder, just, having systems and some structure, so you can, every time it's the same thing, kind of like in golf, the repeatable swing, don't make it up every time,
Yeah, pre-shot.
So, oh yeah, no, if you have that, at least you have a chance, as opposed to just constantly making it up and not knowing what you're doing.
Yes.
You mentioned a formula, and it sounds like you've written some books. Did I glean that from the?
Yeah, this book we wrote in 2019 that did real well. It hit #1, I believe, in 29 categories in 4 countries. And Jack Canfield put his testimonial on the front cover. Dolph DeRose wrote the foreword. He was one of my mentors. And, that's, I should have called it the Modern Wealth Millionaire Formula, but, the Modern Wealth Building Formula is something that came out of me. I was I'm still a big personal development. And, the acronym, I was with my team one day, and, I was talking about Tony Robbins and massive action. And, we were all from Landmark, and we had just taken this wisdom course. And, I was like, this is about bold leadership and forward thinking. And next thing you know, someone said Modern Wealth Building Formula. And I was like, yeah, that has a nice ring to it. And next thing you know, I was on this journey, which took a year to write a book, because, I'm an engineer, I guess left brainer by anatomy, and writing a book was different. It wasn't something I was good at. I averaged about 1 chapter a month, but when it came out, it was fabulous, and I just, thank God, that I get a chance to pay it forward now,
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So you've moved through kind of some different strategies, different asset classes. Can you talk a little bit about the different asset classes and what you've done, and perhaps, what was it that introduced you or appealed to you to go from one to the other, as opposed to just staying in one asset class kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think it all started of my learning, very untraditional, in the sense that when I started analyzing deals, it was from a development perspective, which always had a multi-use component. So I always thought, from being involved in a lot of projects, hey, there's a retail component, there's a commercial component, there's a residential. So when I started to look at real estate, I started to look at it not necessarily from a type, but from an investment that meets a certain criteria that the investor wants to invest in. So whether it was a self-storage or an assisted living or a commercial office building or a CVS I'm doing now, or affordable housing, I now have a hotel, a wellness center, townhomes. To me, they're just a component that you look at, and if it meets the criteria, you could syndicate it essentially. And that's how I kind of looked at it. And then I had to, of course, tame my tendency to look at too many things at once. Like, hey, let's stick with these 3 things. So if I get into a project that has too many uses, For example, in one we're doing in Chester, New Jersey, I sold off the affordable housing component because I can't build as cheap as the affordable housing guy, because he has that system of affordable housing in place. He uses those types of contractors, he uses those materials. He has that relationship with the agency and the state to get the grants that are needed. You know what I'm saying? And I don't have time at this stage of my career to figure that out. I know enough about healthcare. I know enough about retail. I know enough about industrial. I could do regular housing. I could do commercial. And you don't want to be, jack of all trades, master of none. So, and you got to know what you don't know eventually, and admit to it and be brutally honest if you want to get forward, So that's my take on it. I look at it, like I said, if someone's looking, because you have all different kinds of investors. You have, guys that want your firstborn, and, if you're not paying them 20%, they don't want to talk to you. You have your hard money lenders that, that go right up to the usury law. You have, and then you have the other side of the spectrum that you give someone 6, and if they get 10, they're delighted and they're with you forever, and you got to be able, I always tell, my clients that when I'm training them to raise money, you gotta build rapport, of course, with any investor, but you want to find out, where are they at in that spectrum? Do they have money in the bank that they're not earning, that you could put it to work for them, and you become like a partner with them? They're going to be with you for a long time. So, that's my 2 cents on project types and investments. And I guess the last part of the question was, how did I settle in? I liked medical office because, medical office was something that I felt had less risk, obviously for like a pandemic scenario. We have like 24 of them and we did okay. And, I've always, shied away from retail because, I saw the internet kind of slowly shutting it down type of thing, and stuck towards the residential. Obviously, if you can ever get a hold of anything on the industrial storage side, try to jump all over it. But that's what I kind of learned in my gallivanting in real estate,
Yeah. No, I like being able to identify what it is and then recognize what you're good at and what you're not good at, and being able to let go of that. I think that it's so often the case that people are so hungry for an opportunity, they don't always recognize whether or not it's a good opportunity for them. Yeah. And they hold on tight to something that's never going to materialize because they don't have the skills or the resources to see it to the finish line. So that's definitely a positive thing. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned raising money, syndicating. Is that primarily the way you go about raising funds for your projects?
Yeah, it's been, I've always syndicated. My first project, I use the word syndication, I guess, because, I've always put together, partnerships where I've, broken up the shares, raised money, and kind of reverse engineered into, the largest slice I could take, I guess you could say, and then, when I first started, I didn't have equity. So I knew my slice was going to be small. So I was focused on fees, how to get out of the box. And as I grew, I was able to take a larger slice and share fees and things like that. And I might be going off on a tangent, but on the questioning, but that's kind of how my thinking was initially. And I don't think I answered your question, but
no, I was just trying to understand how did you go about raising the capital, basically, and you said partnerships or some sort of other people's money kind of thing, syndications or
so New York, I guess you could say, a little different. There was a lot of money, so we would do in reverse that you would do, I guess, in a more securitized offering, where the money investors get 70% of the project and the GP gets 30. Where in New York, it was the opposite. We would sell off 30% and keep 70 for ourselves and do it with just like offering memorandums. And it was very simple because, money was just around the corner, and then when I got out of New York a couple of years ago, just because things went haywire, I was like, okay, it's not as easy to raise money. So should I get more securitized? My next raise was only, I think, 5 million to buy this 28-acre Chester center of town. And, and then I started to think where I'm at now, where in order to really take on like $100 million project that we have in North Carolina, I've been considering putting a fund together in a more securitized format. But I've always been fortunate, I guess, just, to have a decent track record where people have, hung in with me over the years. And most of my projects have never been, I guess, outside of New York, astronomical numbers where, I needed to go raise $30-40 million, where now, I'm in that position and, I don't want to have to call hundreds of people to raise that. I'd rather get, attract a family office and build that type of relationship at this stage in my career.
No, absolutely. If you can have fewer, bigger investors, I would think just to be able to control the relationships, I think would be one less hassle or challenge. I'll say challenge. You'd mentioned a little bit about a mentor of yours. Can you speak to the value of mentorship and lessons maybe you learned from your mentors?
Yes, I will tell you that, there aren't many shortcuts in life, but I would say mentorship is a good shortcut to consider. Not in the sense that it will necessarily save a tremendous amount of time, but it will, I believe, save you a tremendous amount of worry and viewpoint that you have to reinvent the wheel. Because if you can mirror and model a mentor that's already done it, it's going to, reduce a lot of the friction that you're going to have moving forward. I've had mentors, in the personal development side. I've had mentorships in real estate, on the physical side, because when you get into big time real estate, and developing skyscrapers, the game, the kickoff every day, it starts at like 6 a.m, so, for over 20 years, I woke up at 5 and I walked in the door at midnight because, between working and then going to school at NYU at night, and, I got home late every night. It was really crazy. Or that's when I would go to bed. Maybe I'd walk in at like 11, but I'd be so wound up from the day. And that's how it was, and one day I look back in 2008 when we lost $330 million in 1 year, one day, when Lehman Brothers crashed, and I didn't want to do real estate anymore. Eventually I realized, wow, I had 125,000 hours in real estate development and construction. And I was doing it subconsciously at that time, unconsciously conscious. And, after a couple of years of being in the funk, I went back in head first. And by 2015, I actually cracked the code and was pouring concrete towers in New York City, non-union. So it was pretty interesting.
Wow. Well, it's definitely a major shift of events there from, that whole time in space is pretty dramatic. Everybody's got some sort of a tie to that.
Yeah.
But glad you were able to make it through and back and back on your feet there. I'm curious. You've talked about a lot of, or we've talked a lot about your building of assets and stuff, and with the investors net. Has your strategy been primarily to build and sell, or have you been able to build and retain in a portfolio, or how are you set up that way?
Yeah, great question. So, I would say I didn't learn the hard way, but my original strategy, only because I knew development and because in New York City, you at one point, we made like $50 million on 240 Park Avenue because you would build for like 1,400 a square foot and you would sell for 1,800 to 2,100 a square feet. Like it was just ridiculous. And we would keep the first floor the retail, and that was for many, many years the only assets that I was retaining because, I just didn't know any better. I was kind of like a developer. And I look back, especially when the pandemic hit, and I was like, wow, what if I owned those 300 units and I didn't sell them? Would I be collecting rent right now? So, and I never really wanted to go down that thought process. But, like it wasn't until, several years thereafter where we began to accumulate the office buildings. And still a lot of our profits were, get the entitlement approval and then sell off the approvals to other developers. And then at this stage, we're taking on our developments. We're, building the CVS, North Carolina. I intend on building the townhomes and some of the other things. So, it's like anything else, we're all growing and graduating and taking on things, to reduce the path of resistance,
No, totally. No, I think there's always the opportunity for reflection and, coulda, shoulda, woulda, but, and like you said, you kind of learn as you go and, if you're able to course correct and do things differently, but no, I just love I love I love to hear the story of everybody's journey in real estate and just,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of it, it's one thing to, read a bunch of books and listen to a bunch of podcasts and go to a bunch of seminars and everything. But until you're actually, you're in it and you're the one that's kind of sweating the details or, I mean, I can't think of a closing I've ever gone to where I haven't had a little bit of a sense of like, did we check all the numbers twice? I mean, there's just some sort of a sense of like, here we go, kind of thing. And it doesn't, I guess the level of unknown or uncertainty isn't nearly as high as it once was, but it's still, when you get in and live bullets are flying, it's different than talking about it. So, but that's great. Hey, Ken, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second.
Sure.
By day, I'm an insurance broker, and I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's a couple different strategies we typically consider. We first look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. And if that's not an option, then we look and see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And when we cannot avoid nor minimize the risk, then we look to see if we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. It's a risk transfer vehicle. And so I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. You can frame this however you like. It could be your clients, investors, the market, interest rates, whatever. But if you can take a look at your situation and identify what you consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I am an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer. And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Ken Van Loo, what is the biggest risk?
Yeah, I think, you could look at risk in a couple different contexts. One, you obviously want to look at the risk, of your personal life. I've been in situations where I've done big projects where I've placed all my assets in a trust and, if things were to go array, in the sense of building projects, in a lot of cases, I used to have to put up performance bonds. So, it was a large sense of, similar to like a personal guarantee, and when the bonding company steps in, which you're, being in insurance must be very familiar, we used to get into, sub-guard policies and, because, bonding was very expensive. The construction in the high rise we talked about before, the construction portion of it was always the highest risk, right? Some of those contracts were in the neighborhood of $50 million. You're buying, curtain walls from all different parts of the world. I was traveling to Italy and Canada and, making sure things are getting on the boat in time and, all these little things, everything had to work like clockwork. And, in that world, it was extremely risky. And what we used to do is, we would bond every single trade if we had to, or if I couldn't bond the trades, I would have to subguard the entire project in order to, satisfy the bank, in case something happened. This mechanism was in place to save the day. And I guess, if you're just looking at an investment, there's risk with that. You want to make sure, you're buying an asset, there's not going to be this huge capital expenditure. My expertise in building buildings, I can go in and, jump in an elevator shaft and tell you, when the thing's gonna, die. I could go and look at central HVAC plants from building data centers and, what's going to happen. So, I think the biggest risk with people buying existing assets is not knowing what they're looking at, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shoot, I gotta, upgrade the electrical service to 400 amps to get the tenant upstairs, and that means digging the road. And I had these two dentists that had a building in White Plains. They wanted to convert it to residential, but we needed to upgrade the gas service and the water service. And, they waited too long, and then they started building 400 unit next door. And I'm like, guys, you got to pull the trigger now, So those are the kind of risks, not knowing what you don't know, or not, like we said before, recognizing what you don't know, and getting out of your own way, because our egos, I think, sometimes on a personal level. So there's all different kind of levels, I think, all different kind of contexts, so, I talked about personal, existing assets, how the development is viewed, and how, I think that insurance aspect comes into play, in that case.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great insight, and I appreciate you kind of taking us through that. I deal with construction quite a bit, and bonding, and that it's not always that everybody understands that element of it, and what its purpose is and how it works. Yeah. So it's definitely a different thing there. Hey, Ken, where can listeners go if they'd like to connect with you or learn more?
Yes, check out my 11millionairesecrets.com. That's just some free gifts I give. And, if you're serious and you want to talk to me, you can go to my website. It's kenvanloo.com. There's a free planning call. Literally, you can schedule a call directly with me. And if for some reason I don't think you're real, I won't call you, but most cases you won't fill out the application unless you're real, and we chat. And I'm just here to try to help you. I wrote the book. I have what's called as the global real estate investment enterprise, where once people join, they can't get out. It's like the mafia, I guess you could say. And we say you're not, you can't get away from me, because I'm going to make you successful in real estate. And that's how I get to pay it forward, my education and learning. And I do that once a week. And then the rest of my day is developing real estate. And, one of my hobbies is magic. So I'm always playing with coins and cards and entertaining. So have fun, but that's it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Ken, I can't say thanks enough for taking the time to talk. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes.
Learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Yes. Surety companies. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. And like you said, not a lot of people understand that level of insurance and how important it is, in moving forward into larger scale real estate.
Yeah, no, there's in order to really go forward, you've got to have pretty stout financials and prove it. You can't just, say, trust me on that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely. All right. Well, again, thank you. And for our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.